Hi, welcome to The Doorway to the Word. Today is episode 4 of the book of Job, the Prologue, part 3, the conversation with wife. Well, interesting at this point that suddenly that the new character comes into the story. That's Job's wife. And he has a conversation with her. And actually this part is very short, only for about 4 lines. But I find there's something interesting in this. So I'd like to share this conversation with his wife. Well, which is in chapter 2, verse 9 till verse 10. It's only 2 verses, but I find it really interesting. As I said, in the earlier episode, that as the suffering came to Job, that everybody deserted him, including his family, except those 3 friends of Job's and his wife, who remained with him. And in chapter 2, verse 9 to verse 10, they have a conversation. It says, in verse 9, his wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." Very harsh word, isn't it? And Job replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not the trouble?" Sounds very simple, isn't it? His wife was saying, "Why are you still keeping your faith in God? After all this, why don't you just curse God and die? End this." And Job said, "Don't be stupid, woman." Oh well, maybe, we can just read it through as it is. But the interesting is I found in the alternative variant translation something a little bit different. And this variant translation says, "And his wife says to him, 'You are still keeping hold on to your integrity. Bless God and die.'" I read again. "And his wife says to him, 'Are you still keeping hold on your integrity? Bless God and die.'" I read of the first translation. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." The alternate translation. And his wife said to him, "You are still keeping hold on to your integrity. Bless God and die." Major difference. Same passage, but 2 totally opposite translations. One said curse God, the other one said bless God. You see, it confused me a bit. So I looked into the original Hebrew passage there. The word curse here in Hebrew is the word barak. And actually, its literal meaning of word barak is bless or to bless, derived from the word berek, which means to kneel or to kneel in adoration. Nothing to do with a cursing. The word barak appears in the Old Testament 330 times. And out of these 330 times, only 6 times the word barak was translated to curse or curse instead of bless or to bless. 4 times out of this 6 translation of curse occurs in the book of Job. The other 2 occurred in the 1 Kings, chapter 21, verse 10 and verse 13. Isn't it interesting? Out of 330, barak was translated to bless. But 4 times in book of Job out of 6 translated curse. Seems like something special there. You see, those 4 verses were in chapter 1, verse 5, when Job offered sacrifice to God on behalf of children who might have cursed God, bracket, Barak, God, in their feast. And next 2 occasions appears in again, chapter 1 and chapter 2, when Satan was having a conversation with God and said to God, surely Job will curse you. That's the word Barak was used. Then, 4th time was in this conversation with his wife. Curse God and die. You see, in Hebrew there is more common word used for curse, which is ara. In Genesis 12, verse 3, when God said, I will bless Barak, those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse Arad. So, why is this passage in the book of Job translated Barak as a curse instead of bless? Well, there are 2 contrasting scenarios we can interpret from this passage. The scenario A, if we translate this Barak as a curse, therefore, in the first translation, why don't you curse God and die? This is scenario A. And this is the most commentaries actually explains this passage. The Job's wife was actually used as an instrument by the devil, the Satan. In this passage, Job's wife sounds like she is telling Job to abandon the faith, abandon his faith in God, saying, what is the point of maintaining your integrity and faith in God, who actually afflicted this suffering and misery in your life? There is no point worshipping him anymore. Instead, curse him and die. End this. You see, this mirrors the statement that Satan made to God regarding Job in chapter 1, chapter 2. He said, but now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Here, Job's wife became a tempter under the influence of evil, just like Eve in the Garden of Eden, who was tempted by Satan and eventually tempted her husband to the fall of a man. She might have meant well. She might have not had evil intent. She might have meant well. That she could not bear seeing her husband continuing the suffering. She might have thought it could be better he just died now instead of carry on suffering. Often we give people who are having a hardship some advice to comfort them, to encourage them out of our own good heart. But it came from a human heart, and sometimes our comfort and advice may not align with what God is doing. The example in the New Testament, in Matthew 16, verse 21 and 23, when Jesus told disciples, I must go to Jerusalem, and I will suffer and die for the people. At that point, the Peter actually rebuked Jesus. And in return, Jesus rebuked Peter, then do not stop me fulfilling the Father's will. And often that we do that when we're trying to comfort but we lack understanding of what God is doing. And then this might be the case for Job's wife in this scenario A. To this, Job replies, "You are talking like a foolish woman." See, he was not going to abandon his faith to escape from this suffering. Well, how about the scenario B? When it says, "Bless God and die." Here, I reckon Job's wife was the one who understood her husband well. It says, "And his wife says to him, 'You are still keeping hold on your integrity. Bless God and die.'" In this passage, "you are still keeping hold on to your integrity," instead of "are you?" In this translation, that part wasn't a question, was an affirmative statement. You see, Job's wife is affirming Job of his integrity and his faith in God. Instead, "You are still keeping your faith in God and integrity." But seeing his suffering, she is suggesting him to end this by dying with his integrity intact, by keep blessing God. See, she knows Job too well that her husband will not curse nor abandon his faith in God. After all, he was a righteous man, the most righteous man in the East. So she suggests to him that if he is to die as a righteous man. Keep your integrity and faith in God by blessing him, so that he will not sin until the end and die as a righteous man. See, Job's wife's suggestion here has a connotation of this, like this: even though he is a man of great faith, if Job continues to live in his horrible state in suffering and agony, this might eventually overcome him and lead him to the place that he will abandon his faith. Instead of ceasing to be a righteous man, it will be better for him to die now as a righteous man, while he is still keeping his integrity by blessing God. This came from her human kindness to her husband. See, Job's wife can accept the blessing from God in his life, but is having difficulty accepting that her husband's suffering came upon him. It is hard for her, like many of us actually, to understand why the bad thing happens to such a righteous man of God. We have to remember Job's wife herself lost exactly the same things that Job had lost. After all, she was his wife. The wealth he lost was wealth she lost. The children he lost was also the children of hers. Now we can imagine that she was suffering the same loss, and maybe this was too much for her. Maybe she was on the verge of losing her faith in God. And if the suffering continues, maybe she has totally lost her faith in God. But I reckon she loves her husband so much, she doesn't want that to happen to Job. But she was afraid that this suffering continues on him, he might lose his faith in God. So she begs Job to bless God and give up, as a death is seen by her as the only outcome of what befell him. Her intent in this scenario B is to see the end of his suffering. She has given up hope, almost given up hope, and suggests her husband to do the same. To her, Job replies, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept the good from God and not trouble?" You see, he replies to his wife, "You are talking like a foolish woman." This can be interpreted like this: why are you trying to deprive me of the hope in God? Don't you know that God is sovereign and good, that he can still save me from this suffering? So don't speak like a foolish woman. You see, at this point, Job still keeps his hope in God. He trusts God totally, that he knows and the family believes that his blessed life, all the blessing in his life, wealth and children and friends and all the good things, they were the result of definite sovereign intervention of God. That his trust lies in. He trusted God and knew that God provided him all the good things in his life. You see, he knows God's loving hands have been upon his life all the way through. So when all the blessings were taken away and everything was lost, including his health, along with his family and wealth, he desperately wanted to believe in God, that his sovereign decision was involved in what was happening in his life. See, that's why he said, God gives us good things and God takes away. But he has a sovereign plan. You know, he said in chapter 1, verse 21, it says, "Shall we accept the good from God and not the trouble? And naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." That tells us he believes in God and his sovereign plan. See, Job's righteousness is based on total trust, the faith in God, and his sovereignty beyond the circumstances of good and bad. Thus, accepting both in good and bad. And God said, Job did not sin in what he said. You see, Job wanted to believe. I believe that Job wanted to believe that the God gives him both good and bad according to his sovereign plan and purpose. I believe Job wanted to believe. He said, I just want to know the purpose of all this suffering I'm receiving. I'm not blaming God or cursing God now, but I just want to know why. You know, I do not want to give up, like my wife is telling me, but I will not stop asking God until He gives me the answer, so that I will have an understanding of what He is doing, so that my faith in Him will continue, because I am innocent. Job's desire was to maintain his faith in God and standing as a righteous man in the eyes of God. Thus, God credited to him. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoings. In all this, Job did not sin in what he says. And at the end, in chapter 42, verse 7, God said, Job spoke the truth about him. Job was innocent and righteous man. Well, after the conversation with his wife, 3 friends arrived. And that's where big discussion argument begins. But that's the next chapter, next episode. So until then, God bless. Goodbye.